Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 292 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be touching on the topic of people pleasing and why you can still be a great leader as a people pleaser. And a lot of thoughtful leaders, I think, are people pleasers, and therefore this is an important topic. So let's get into it right now. So if you consider yourself to be a bit of a people pleaser, you're not the only one. Many thoughtful leaders seem to have this particular trait. But the good news is, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Now, being a people pleaser can, of course, have its drawbacks, but it also has considerable strengths. So in this episode, I'm going to take a look at how to manage these people-pleasing tendencies and still be an effective leader. So the first thing to start with is, okay, what is a people pleaser? How do we define it? Well, it's what it sounds like. It's someone who wants to please other people. And for many people-pleasing leaders that I work with, this means that they might focus on helping and supporting others. They like to create a harmonious environment, and they like to deliver on their commitments so they don't let other people down. So these are all really good things, right? And as you can see, they tend to be more motivated by building positive relationships rather than just getting things done. And this doesn't mean they can't deliver. It just means they may be motivated differently than someone who is very goal-focused and target-driven, for example. So a people pleaser can be an excellent leader because they're interested in and invested in the people around them, and they want to help and support, and they'll spend their time and energy doing that. And as a result, team members who work for a people pleaser may actually feel safe and supported, which can lead to a great team culture as well. But of course, what are the drawbacks of being a people pleaser? Well, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and people pleasers are no different. And when it comes to leadership, there are a few situations where you might struggle if you're one of these people-pleasing personalities. The first thing is you might find it difficult to give people feedback, especially when it may be pointing out areas for improvement. And sometimes a people-pleasing leader may also seek to avoid potential conflict, such as initiating a difficult conversation. You might also find yourself taking on too much because saying no or pushing back may feel like you're letting someone down. And for some leaders, there can also be a desire to be liked by the people around them. Now, this is quite natural, but may not be very helpful in leadership situations. So the first thing I'm going to make clear is that I'm not going to sit here and tell you to stop being a people pleaser, because that's like trying to tell, like a horse to stop being a horse. Now, if you're a people pleaser, you've developed these tendencies over years of your life, all the way from birth through your upbringing and into your adult life and now your leadership. So I don't think it's useful to try to change who we are as people. What's more useful is to be able to acknowledge your people-pleasing tendencies and use that self-awareness to adapt the way you lead. So in other words, it's about understanding your own style, looking out for the warning signs and adapting your behavior accordingly. So that means I'm not going to tell you to stop being a people pleaser. Instead, I'm going to help you watch out for your people-pleasing tendencies and then adjust your behavior when you need to. Because the reality is you can be a people pleaser without doing people-pleasing things all the time. And that is the important statement here. You can be a people pleaser, but you don't have to do people-pleasing things all the time. We can choose our behavior. I actually work with a bunch of thoughtful leaders who would describe themselves as people pleasers, and they've found that one-on-one coaching can be really important in helping them manage some of their people-pleasing tendencies and actually feeling more confident about their leadership. So if you think this could be something you're interested in, then please get in touch. You can do that through my leadership coaching page, and that'll be on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/292. And I've introduced recently a 3-session intro coaching package just for new clients only. And so it gives a little bit of a discounted rate for coaching. So if you're looking for a lower commitment way to try out coaching with me and get some of those benefits of coaching, then I'd encourage you to get in touch. So basically, you can be a people pleaser without doing people pleasing things all the time. And no matter what your style is, you need to adapt. And sometimes I hear leaders in my training courses or workshops say to me, well, that's just the way I am. People can take my personality or leave it. And that's one way to think about it. But the problem happens when people choose the, well, I'll leave it option. And it's easier to just say, that's how I am, because then we don't have to do any work. It's much more difficult to admit that your style may actually be holding you back. It's much more difficult to admit that your style may actually be holding you back in some situations and then taking responsibility for your behavior and working to change it. Now, even people who aren't people pleasers have this challenge. Some leaders are very direct and goal-focused. They have the challenge of steamrolling people and being perceived as aggressive. People pleasers have the opposite challenge. They may be perceived as passive or a pushover. And so what's the answer? Well, the answer is to be aware of your natural tendencies and adapt your style when you need to. You won't need to adapt all the time, but you'll probably already be able to identify a few situations when adapting your style or approach could be quite useful. And there's a related article I'd get you to check out. Should you be yourself or adapt to your audience? I'll put that on the show notes page as well. So let's get down to the business now of working out what you're going to do about this. So if you've identified yourself as a bit of a people pleaser, well, the first thing is congratulations. That's the first step. Next, I'll cover some ideas that I believe can help reduce the impact of your people pleasing nature. Now, the first tip is to use decision-making tools. Now, I believe that most leaders know what they should be doing with regard to their leadership, but sometimes they just struggle to do it. And it's easy to think of a good leader and what they would do, or get advice from someone about what to do, or read a leadership book. But it can be a struggle to follow through because we might feel scared or lack confidence. In other words, the what can be easier than both the how and also motivating yourself to do something difficult. So that's where I believe decision-making tools can be really helpful. And one of the best decision-making tools for leaders that I recommend is understanding their own personal values. Now, when used effectively, personal values can help you make decisions about what you should do in a given situation. This can take away some of this gray area and uncertainty. So, for example, if one of your personal values was honesty, then you can ask yourself, well, if I was living that particular value, what would I do in this situation? And the answer would probably be that you'd communicate openly and provide your honest opinion, even if it made someone else feel a little bit uncomfortable, rather than hide it away. So other examples of decision-making tools are conflict handling styles, which I've got an article on as well, and even a simple 2x2 matrix, which I've got another article on. I'll put those both in the show notes page as well. Now, the point is using decision-making tools to try to get out of your own head a little and make a more objective decision can be a really great way to go. So these tools can reduce the temptation to blindly act out people-pleasing behaviors. And I also do have an online course to help you understand your values and teach you how to use them, which is, and in my opinion, it's one of the best foundations for leadership, is understanding your values effectively. But in most values exercises, I find that it's very surface level and you just get a list of values to choose from and you pick them, and people leave those exercises going, well, so what? In my online course, I basically go into a bit more detail about how to use your values so that you can use them in a practical way. So check out the online course as well. I'll put it in the show notes page for you. It's an investment in your leadership that I think can really pay off. Now, another way to identify or manage your people-pleasing tendency is to practice structured reflection. Now, a useful thing to do when you're trying to reduce your people-pleasing behavior is to identify patterns. Now, a pattern is something you notice happening repeatedly. In leadership, patterns are often found in the way that we respond in various situations. For example, you might notice that when a team member behaves badly, you tend to look the other way instead of addressing it. Or perhaps you fail to communicate with your boss because you're more focused on what's happening in your team. So, structured reflection is a good way to identify patterns, especially when you do it in the context of specific events that you found to be especially positive or negative. Now, I like to call this process useful thinking because it encourages us to learn from and take meaningful action based on our previous experiences. And the process goes something like this. You have an event, which is some sort of success event or failure, and then you reflect to make sense of that event. Then you look at your intention for next time. So you think, okay, if that event happened to me again or a similar thing happened to me again, what would I do next time? And that is a good way to come up with constructive ways to address the situation in future. And that means we can move forward and feel more confident. So following this sort of process is a really good way to make sense of things that happen in your work and life and then come up with strategies if a similar thing happens again. And it's such a valuable process that this is when I created the Useful Thinking Journal, which is basically a structured reflection tool you can use as well. I'll whack it on the show notes page if you think this might be useful for you as well. And there's also Thoughtful Leader Podcast episode 259, which I'd encourage you to go back and listen to if you haven't already, about why leaders should have a reflective practice. Check that out too. Now, another thing I think is very useful for being a people pleaser is to examine the negative consequences. So, what I mean by this is, and it works really well for me personally, is I look at the negative consequences that might happen if I don't take appropriate action. For example, I know I should probably talk to that team member about the bad behavior in the meeting the other day. But what might happen if I don't do that? Well, by avoiding that conversation, you might be setting a precedent for the future. That team member will feel like they can behave that way again. You might also be sending a bad message to other team members because they see that this behavior is tolerated, so they might feel they can do it themselves. You might also be damaging your reputation by avoiding that difficult conversation. And people see that you're not doing anything about the problem, so you may lose respect, and people may no longer want to follow your lead. Now, you probably wouldn't want any of those things to happen, so thinking in this way can be a great way to motivate you to do the right thing. And honestly, I use this technique all the time. When I think about, well, I don't want to do this thing because it's uncomfortable or difficult, but what's the problem if I don't do it? And that's what actually motivates me into acting. So yeah, it's a underrated tool, I reckon. Now, the next thing you can do is to reframe the way you think about situations. This can be a really powerful thing for people pleasers. And basically, it's about seeing situations differently. A common example is a glass of water. If the glass is filled halfway to the top, an optimist is seen as someone who would say the glass is half full. A pessimist would take the negative slant and the glass would be half empty. But actually, a thoughtful leader like you would know that the glass is actually full because it's got half air and half water. But the point is, reframing is simply changing your perspective about a situation. So when it comes to being a people pleaser, there's a few examples that I want to point out. The first one is feedback. So you might be fearful of giving someone feedback because it might hurt their feelings. So this will mean they dislike you, which is the opposite of people pleasing. And therefore, you are tempted to avoid giving the feedback. A reframing of this situation might be that you are actually hurting the person by withholding your feedback because they don't have an opportunity to improve. So you can see what I've done there. You're actually hurting the person by not giving them the feedback. A second way to think about reframing is when you're addressing bad behavior. So using our example of bad behavior earlier, a people pleaser may be hesitant to address bad behavior in a team because it may result in conflict and upset someone. But you could reframe it by thinking, well, if I don't address the bad behavior, I'm actually upsetting the other team members who are doing the right thing. Another common people pleaser behavior is when they say yes to everything. For example, when your boss asks you to take on additional tasks, you say yes even if you're feeling overloaded. So a reframe for this situation might be that if you keep taking on more work, you might burn yourself out, meaning that you'll be very unhelpful to your boss if you call in sick. So you can see the idea now. If you take a different perspective, it can help you to take a different action because you're seeing the situation in a different way. So you can't change your true nature, but this doesn't mean that you need to do people-pleasing things all the time. People who try to turn off their own personalities put themselves under stress because they are continuously trying to act like somebody else. Now, being a people pleaser has great advantages in leadership, but it also comes with its drawbacks. So look out for your people pleasing tendencies and adapt your style when you need to. Then you can be a people pleaser and a great leader at the same time. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this one. If you're a people pleaser, how do you manage it? Let me and all the other thoughtful leaders know in the comments on the show notes page, or whack a comment into Spotify, because you can add comments under the Spotify episode there if you're a Spotify listener. So that'd be great to hear what you think about this particular topic. And if you have a few seconds to spare, it'd be great if you could leave a positive review on your podcast app of choice. Helps me get the word out about the Thoughtful Leader podcast and help other thoughtful leaders just like you. Thank you for listening to this episode. I'll be back next week.